is where we started, and we've transitioned into some other business ventures.
I just believe that I can always train for skill, but I can't train you to be nice.
And I kind of gave that up and decided to just go a different direction.
And now, here's Just Saying.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Just Saying podcast. The events of the past couple of weeks in Minneapolis and in New York City and Atlanta and Portland, Cleveland, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and many other cities have pretty much preoccupied the country after the shooting of Aubrey Ahmaud in Georgia, while the country suffered through a lockdown for 2 months due to the coronavirus pandemic. And then the senseless killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and suddenly you had all of the makings for people across the country to be fed up internationally as well, and finally say enough is enough. So since that first day of protest in Minneapolis that turned into looting in cities across the country, everyone has really been preoccupied with the situation, and everyone seems to have an opinion about it. Our podcast guest for this week was supposed to be author and cartoonist Jerry Craft, one of only a handful of African-American syndicated cartoonists. And we weren't going to talk too much about the state of affairs, but rather Jerry's creative genius as a book author and a cartoon strip artist. But what's been going on in the country has pulled Jerry into many productive discussions through interviews and Zoom calls. And because of that, he fell behind on his publisher's deadline for his latest book, which is due to come out this week. So Jerry asked if we could push his appearance on the Just Saying podcast until after he hits his deadline. And of course, we obliged. He will be a great guest when he comes on with tremendous insight into his world of artistic contributions to the African American community, but also to the community of all students and parents at large. His comic strips focus on the day-to-day life of an African American family in his series Mama's Boyz. And it's filled with the kind of humor that you would expect in a newspaper comic strip or a cartoon illustrated book. But it also offers good life messages about fitting in, making a name, and handling being a new kid in school. Craft uses his experience through his life growing up in Washington Heights, in New York City. And so while Jerry Craft is at his desk in his Connecticut home, diligently writing and drawing towards his publisher's deadline for his latest book, I thought it might be good to share a segment with you that I produced when I first met Jerry back in 2012. The segment allows Jerry Craft to show you how he shares his God-given talent and tenacity with the community, and how his story of determination helps to make a pretty good life for himself, his own family, while also inspiring, educating, and entertaining others. So here is Jerry Craft.
5 tickets to the 2:30 showing in 3D, $67.50 please. How much for 2D? $55. How much for 1D? Mama's Boyz is about an African-American family, and it's a mom raising her 2 teenage sons, and there's also an uncle and a grandfather.
He's one of only a handful of African-American syndicated cartoonists. And Craft uses his strip to make people laugh, but also to send a message about life, heritage, and responsibility based on his own experiences growing up in Washington Heights. So how much has this neighborhood changed in the last 20 years since you've been here?
Well, the buildings still look the same. They've held up pretty well. I think the biggest thing is that you don't see kids playing on the street. And we were a group that, we played all the time, from 8 o'clock in the morning until almost midnight sometimes. So this is where I grew up. I lived here for the first 30 years of my life. So it would start where, Kenny appeared, they'd come, and I'd be there, yo, Jerry! A lot of my friends when I was coming up were either raised by their mother or their grandmother. I was one of the few kids that had both a mother and father living at home. So I wanted to sort of pay respect to those hardworking moms that raised kids that were as bad as some of my friends. We had a lot of block moms. If you ran across the street without looking, you'd have Miss Duncan. Jerry, what's this? I'm gonna tell your mother. As I've gotten older and once I had kids, I kind of like writing for mom a little better because I've got that sort of parental aspect to me now. The one that I based it on a little bit more was Ms. Smalls. And Ms. Smalls had the house where we all went. The door was always open. There'd always be something to eat. She'd be cooking pound cake and all kinds of stuff. And you'd go in and you just hang out.
And the strong influences in his life helped him to find his creative voice, a sense of drive, and a tenacity that he would need to see his dream come to life. He went to high school in Harlem and got his BFA from the School of Visual Arts. He spent 8 years as a copywriter for a small ad agency while honing his ideas for his own comic strip. When Jerry first started shopping his comic strip idea around, he found out just how tough it was going to be.
I sent out to different syndicates, and I got rejection letters from all of them, including King Features, but on the rejection letter, Jay Kennedy had taken the time to actually handwrite a note saying, okay, keep up the good work. It's close, but not there yet.
So he continued to work on his strip and get new ideas while he was working as an editor for Sports Illustrated for Kids.
I'm around kids all the time, and you could just really sit back and watch, and they say the funniest things.
In 1992, Jerry got his first break almost out of spite.
My dad used to bring in a local newspaper, and there was a comic strip in there, and used to just drive me crazy because I used to criticize it all the time. And one day my father was like, you know what, he's in the paper, you're not, so you need to give him a break. Basically, you know, put up or shut up. I basically came up with a comic strip that was the precursor to Mama's Boys. It was called The Outside View. So I called up the editor of that newspaper. I asked him if I could submit some stuff. He's like, sure. And he liked it, and he said that he'd run it. And I couldn't wait for that next issue to come out, and I anxiously opened it up. Then he looked at it, his eyes popped out. So I guess my art career kind of started more out of spite and wanting to show my dad than anything. Although, I mean, he was very supportive.
Since then, he's been published in numerous newspapers throughout the country. When Jerry decided to begin writing books, he was met with the same industry resistance.
This one was like, yeah, we're not interested in this kind of good time style of humor.
Dynamite!
And I was really kind of offended by that because it was a different kind of thing than what I was trying to do. It was more insult-oriented.
Handsome, you look like a string of spaghetti with a little meatball on top.
It was one of those that they lived in the projects, and it's like, okay, you're struggling all the time, and there really weren't that many good times.
He's an author of 3 graphic novels and had immediate success since self-publishing the first one, Mama's Boys, as American as Sweet Potato Pie.
The only people who bought the first book were African Americans. The second book opened up a little bit more because I had reading groups and libraries. I had people like that saying, okay, you know, we're going to take 50 of your books and we're going to do like a reading thing with our kids. And they gave it to the kids.
Now he spends much of his downtime volunteering and speaking at schools and youth centers, trying to inspire his audience through art and humor.
So whatever circle you did for the head, we're going to do that same circle for the body. With kids who are younger, 5 and 6, they think they can do anything. But like 12 or 13, some of these kids have really shut down. I'll do like a triangle. Mr. Kraft, I can't do it. I can't draw. I can't. It's like, relax.
Jerry Kraft provides enrichment programs, specifically cartooning, for our students, and he's introducing them to an art form that normally they would not have had access to.
And now we're going to thicken that arm up a little bit. We're going to do another L inside that.
Jerry is one of the most popular facilitators of enrichment that we have. They come out not thinking that they could even do a caricature, and they come out with a character of SpongeBob or the president, and they walk around so proud of their efforts.
He produces over 50 strips a year, but for Jerry Kraft, the long nights of work are just another day in the funny papers.
I spend quite a few nights at this table till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, meeting deadlines, but it's fun.
So that is Jerry Kraft, and we will hopefully get him on the Just Sayin podcast in the coming weeks, where he'll be able to tell us his story in person and share news about his latest publication as well. But tune in next week because our guest will be another author, Susie Krause, who will share her inspirations and her story writing techniques for her recently released book called Sorry I Missed You. The paperback is out now, as well as the audiobook. So how about this? Grab a copy, give it a read or a listen, and join us next week when Susie Krause will be here to give us all of the inside scoop on how a debt collector became a published author. Just saying. That will do it for this edition of the Just Saying podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and never miss an episode of the Just Saying podcast. You can also catch the Just Saying podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, or you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Charlie Cornacchio. Thanks for tuning in to the Just Saying podcast. Stay safe and be kind. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Just Saying podcast.